It was supposed to be just another dinner, awkward, yes, but manageable. I had learned to sit through the silences, to smile when the air got tight, to nod politely when stories were told around me like I wasn't part of them. But that night was different. The table was full roast chicken wine, laughter clinking off the walls in carefully controlled doses. I sat at the far end, next to her, the girl I had once called mine. She wasn't a child anymore. She had grown into a woman who wore sharpness like perfume. Someone mentioned the house and how I was still staying in the guest room since the surgery. Someone else joked about how long recovery can take. And that's when she looked at me flat, expressionless, and said, "You're nothing but a burden," just like that. No warning, no bitterness in her tone, just fact. I blinked, unsure if I had heard it right. The room went still, the kind of silence that follows a dropped glass. No one looked at me. They looked at their plates, at their wine, at her, and she didn't flinch. My chest tightened, breath caught somewhere between my ribs. I felt the heat rush to my face, but my hands stayed still in my lap. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I just sat there, stunned not by the cruelty of the words, but by how easily they came. After everything I had given up, everything I had poured into her, life, that's what remained. Not love, not gratitude, just that one word. Burden. No one defended me. That was the part I felt most, not the insult itself. I'd heard worse in colder rooms, but the way everyone let it settle like it belonged. Her father cleared his throat, but said nothing. Her cousin tried to change the subject, cracking a joke that nobody laughed at. And I sat there with a smile frozen on my face, like a photograph taken 1 second too late. My fork was still in my hand, hovering above a plate I had no intention of finishing. I glanced down at it, at the food I had prepared myself that afternoon, because I still believed effort could be enough. My mind raced through memories, the time she called me at 2 a.m. in tears, the college deposit I secretly paid when her father refused, the nights I stayed up waiting for her to come home just to make sure she was safe, all of that tucked away in invisible drawers no one would ever open. I had told myself for years that love didn't need to be acknowledged to be real. But in that moment, with her words hanging in the air like dust, I realized something else. When love becomes invisible for too long, people begin to believe it was never there. I looked around that table and felt like a stranger in the house I helped hold together. I was no longer the stepmother, the partner, the one who tried. I was the guest, the extra plate, the inconvenience. And she had just said it out loud, so no one would have to pretend otherwise anymore. I excused myself from the table a few minutes later, not dramatically, not in tears, just a quiet, "I think I need some air," and a gentle push of the chair against the hardwood. No one stopped me, no one followed. I walked out the front door and into the night, barefoot, leaving my shoes by the door like I didn't want to bring them with me anymore. The porch light buzzed above, casting a pale glow across the garden I had once planted with my own hands, dirt under my fingernails, sweat on my neck, and her laughter echoing beside me. That garden still bloomed. Even when I didn't, I stood there staring at it, wondering how something could keep growing in a place that had learned to forget me. My hands trembled slightly as I held onto the railing. Not from cold, but from the sudden realization that I had stayed too long in a role that had no script left for me. I had been giving constantly, hoping one day someone would look up and say, "I see you," but they never did. Instead, she looked at me and saw, wait, something to carry, something to resent. Not the woman who had stepped in when her mother walked away, not the one who held her hair back when she was sick, who drove her to job interviews, who stood in the back of her graduation trying not to cry. None of that mattered now. I wasn't history. I was heaviness, and for the first time I believed her. Not because it was true, but because no one else had said it wasn't. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room, if you can still call it that after 3 years, with the door half closed and my eyes wide open. Replaying the moment like a loop, I couldn't pause. "You're nothing but a burden." Over and over, the words echoed, not in her voice, but in mine. My mind whispered them back to me, trying them on like a jacket that didn't quite fit but still hung on my shoulders. I looked around the room. The walls still had the soft lavender paint I chose when we moved in, thinking it would bring a sense of calm. The photos on the dresser were ones I had framed her as a teenager, her with her father, and one of the 3 of us from a summer trip I now couldn't look at the same way. Every item in that room had my fingerprints on it. Every corner had a trace of care, and yet I had somehow become disposable, replaceable, a weight. I thought about leaving that night, truly leaving, packing a bag, calling a cab, disappearing, before the morning light had a chance to reveal my red-rimmed eyes. But something stopped me. Not fear, not pride. Something quieter, like a voice inside me that said, "Wait, not like this." I sat up and reached for the notebook I kept in the drawer. I hadn't written in months, but that night I needed to hear my own voice again. I opened to a blank page and wrote the only sentence I could manage. This is not who I am. And somehow, that was the first step back to remembering who I used to be. I spent the early morning walking through the house before anyone else woke up. I touched things not to clean, not to organize, just to feel what I had built. The curtain rods I installed, the cushions I reupholstered, the chipped coffee mug I glued back together after she knocked it over as a teenager and ran off crying. I had made this place livable, not just with money, but with attention. With presence. I remembered the first year I moved in how she left notes around the house that said, "You're not my mom." And how, despite the sting, I kept showing up, driving her to school, helping her with math, standing in the rain with an umbrella at her soccer games when her friends forgot to pick her up. I just tried to be someone steady, reliable, quietly there. And slowly, I had thought it mattered. She started calling me when she was scared, started asking what I thought about things, started handing me her trust in small, clumsy pieces. And I took every one of them like a gift. But now, sitting on the couch where we once watched movies in our pajamas, I wondered if any of it had rooted, if love, unrecognized, eventually just fades. I ran my fingers across the edge of the coffee table, remembering how she spilled nail polish on it once and cried because she thought I'd be angry. I wasn't. I had laughed. I had cleaned it up. And now, after all of that, I was nothing but something in the way. Something she had learned to step over. Even as I knelt down to keep her standing by mid-morning, I had made a decision. Not dramatic, not final, but firm. I started packing a small bag, just essentials. A few changes of clothes, my journal, the framed photo of my sister and me from before everything changed. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out of the role. No one had asked me to play anymore. I folded everything with care, not sadness, just clarity. For too long I had measured my worth by how much I could carry. I had called exhaustion devotion. I had confused tolerance for love. And now, with each item I placed in that bag, I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want an apology yelled across the hallway. I wanted room. To breathe again, I looked at the guest bed made neatly like I was always ready to prove I deserved to stay. I had given up so much to belong, and still, I was always temporary. I sat down and wrote a short note. "I'll be gone for a while, don't worry. I just need space to remember who I am when I'm not trying to earn love." I left it on the nightstand, beneath the coaster I had crocheted one winter while she watched TV beside me. When I zipped the bag closed, I didn't feel regret. I felt weightlifting. Not because I was abandoning anything, but because I was no longer accepting being diminished to make others more comfortable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to stay and be strong, it's to leaven. Let that be your strength. I arrived at my sister's house just before sunset. She opened the door with wide eyes but didn't ask anything. She just pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than I expected. "Guest room's made," she said, voice soft. I nodded, swallowing, the lump rising in my throat. We didn't talk much that night. She made tea. I helped slice fruit, and we sat in silence, the kind that doesn't demand anything. I hadn't felt that kind of stillness in years, the kind where I wasn't being watched, evaluated, measured by how useful I was. After dinner, she handed me a blanket and said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't used to people naming what I was too tired to say. I sat in the room she'd prepared, soft pillows, lavender, scent in the air, a candle already lit on the dresser, and I cried. Not from sadness alone, but from the shock of being somewhere I didn't have to prove my presence was earned. That night, I took a long bath and let the water hold what I couldn't anymore. The sentence still floated in my head, "You're nothing but a burden." But it was quieter now, duller, like a weapon that had lost its edge the moment I chose not to hold it anymore. I wasn't angry, I was empty. And in that emptiness, I started to find space for myself. For my own voice, for the version of me that had been silenced by service, and somewhere between the tea, the blanket, and my sister's quiet understanding, I began to believe. Maybe I didn't have to carry what was never mine to begin with. The next morning, I sat by the kitchen window with my journal open, letting the sun hit my hands as they rested above the page. I didn't write right away. I just sat there, breathing, watching the trees shift outside, hearing the faint noise of a neighbor's dog barking. Ordinary life, peaceful, unhurried mine. Eventually, the words came. I didn't write about her. Not directly. I wrote about the woman I used to be before I was constantly explaining my worth. The one who loved long walks and rainy Sundays, who painted flower pots and collected old postcards. I wrote about how she used to really laugh before. She became a version of herself that walked on eggshells, trying not to disturb the comfort of others. I wrote, "I gave more than they ever saw, and I lost more than they'll ever admit. But I also wrote, I am not that loss. I sat with those words for a long time, repeating them in my head, holding them like a promise. At some point, my sister walked in and placed a hand on my shoulder without saying a word. It was the first touch I'd felt in days that didn't come with an expectation. Just warmth, just presence. Later, I made breakfast for the two of us. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, no performance, no proving, just existing. And with every sip, every bite, I remembered how powerful it is to be in a space where you don't have to explain your pain to be believed, where you don't have to earn your right to be seen. I was finally beginning to see myself clearly, gently, and for the first time in far too long. Later that afternoon, I found a small box in the closet where I kept old things, letters, photos, pieces of myself I'd tucked away to make room for someone else's comfort. Inside was a photo of us from years ago. She was younger, leaning into me, a smile on her face that now felt like a memory borrowed from someone else's life. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if that closeness had ever been real or if I had just wanted it to be. Alongside the photo was a card she'd written me one Mother's Day. Just a few lines. Thank you for showing up, even when I didn't make it easy. I ran my finger over those words, and they stung more than the insult at the dinner table, because they reminded me there had been a moment, however brief, when she saw me, when she acknowledged that I had been more than furniture in her life. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not the cruelty, but the amnesia. How easy it had been for her to forget who I had been for her. How easily I'd been rewritten as weight. I placed the card back in the box, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that I hadn't imagined it all, that I had been there fully. I sat back, hands resting on my lap, and whispered to myself, you can grieve what someone stopped remembering and still choose not to chase their memory. That was the shift, not forgetting the love I gave, but finally refusing to keep offering it where it was only met with silence. 2 days passed before anyone reached out. It was her father, calm, hesitant, unsure which version of me he'd find on the other end of the line. He asked how I was. I said, healing. He asked if I was coming back. I said, not right now. There was a pause, and then, carefully, he said, she didn't mean it. And I felt something in my chest, hardened out of spite, but out of exhaustion. She said it clearly, I replied, and everyone heard it, including you. Another pause. He exhaled, and I heard him lean into the weight of it. I didn't know what to say, he admitted. I know, I said, but I needed someone to say something. It wasn't about revenge or guilt. I didn't want apologies scraped together. After the damage, I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted someone, anyone, to have stood between me and the blow, and no one had before we ended the call. He asked if he could visit. I said yes, but not today. I needed a few more nights where I didn't have to explain why I was quiet. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the wind move through the trees. I wasn't angry at him. I understood his silence came from discomfort, not malice, but understanding it didn't make it easier to sit with. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people who loved you just enough to stay close, but never quite enough to defend you. And I had decided I wouldn't shrink anymore to make them comfortable with that. Silence. That evening, I took a walk alone. The streets were quiet, washed in the soft gold of a setting sun. The kind of light that makes everything feel softer, even the ache in your chest. I passed a bookstore and stopped in without thinking. Inside, it smelled like paper and old wood, and I wandered the aisles slowly, touching spines like old friends. I found a journal, a beautiful one, stitched by hand, the cover a deep, calming blue. I bought it without hesitation. A gift, not for someone else, but for me. That night, back at my sister's, I opened it and wrote on the first page, I will not make myself small for people who forget how much space I held for them. I didn't write her name. I didn't need to. This was no longer about her. This was about reclaiming every part of me I had abandoned to be likable, helpful, available. I thought of all the dinners I had cooked, the plans I had canceled, the times I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, even when my heart was screaming. And I realized I had trained them to expect my silence. I had modeled a kind of love that came with no boundaries, and now I was the one paying for it. But this new journal wasn't for apologies or analysis. It was for rebuilding, for voice, for story, for self. I closed it gently and whispered, you are allowed to take up space, even if they call it a burden, because sometimes the only way to heal from being unseen is to start seeing yourself again. The next morning, I woke early before the world could press itself into me. I made tea slowly, savoring the stillness, letting the warmth of the cup ground me. I opened my new journal and wrote down a list titled Things I Am, even if they never say it. I filled it with truths I had almost forgotten. Patient, devoted, brave, capable, tender. I didn't write them for affirmation. I wrote them as reminders. Because when someone tells you you're a burden and the room agrees with silence, it becomes easy to start doubting your own weight. But I had carried so much, held so many people, and now I was holding myself. After writing, I called a local community center I had always admired. I asked about volunteer opportunities, something simple, just a few hours a week. Not because I needed to give again, but because I wanted to serve without disappearing. They welcomed me warmly, no questions asked, and for the first time in weeks, I felt useful, not to prove something, but to feel connected again on my own terms. I closed the call and smiled. This was the difference. I wasn't trying to be needed. I was trying to be present. For me, as I folded the blanket on the couch and watered my sister's plants, I whispered to the quiet, I am still good, even if they didn't say it at the table, even if they never do. That kind of truth doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from no longer waiting to be rescued from your own story. A week later, I returned to the house, not to stay, but to gather what was mine. I arrived mid-afternoon when I knew she wouldn't be home. Her father was there. He opened the door slowly, like he wasn't sure I'd show up. You look rested, he said. I nodded. He stepped aside. No more questions. No forced warmth, just space, and that was enough. I walked through the house with a new kind of calm. Not sadness, not attachment, just clarity. I took only what belonged to me: books, photos, a few handmade things I'd tucked away over the years. I found the garden gloves I used to wear when planting lavender along the fence. I held them for a moment, then left them. Not everything has to be taken to be remembered. Before leaving, I placed a letter on the kitchen counter, sealed short, kind. I didn't write it to change her mind. I wrote it so I wouldn't carry unspoken words. I told her I forgave her even if she never asked, that I wouldn't be staying, that I hoped one day when she looks back, she see not the weight, but the hands that held her. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the air shift, like the house itself had exhaled, and maybe I had too. Walking to the car, bag in hand, I didn't feel like someone who'd been pushed out. I felt like someone who had finally walked away, not from love, but from the version of it that asks you to vanish inside of it. And I was done vanishing. Back at my sister's place, I unpacked slowly. No rush, no wait, just movement. I placed my books on a shelf she had cleared for me, hung the framed photo of my mother, the one I used to hide in drawers so it wouldn't stir discomfort in others, and folded my clothes into drawers that finally felt like mine. That evening, I cooked dinner while music played low in the background. Nothing fancy, just food that tasted like comfort. My sister joined me at the table, and for once I wasn't bracing for a sentence to slice through the meal. We ate in peace. No eggshells, no performance. Just two women sharing space with nothing owed. Afterward, I sat on the couch and reopened my journal. On a fresh page, I wrote, "This is the life I build with my hands, not the one they allowed me to have." It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a vow. I didn't know exactly what was next. I didn't have a 5-year plan or a perfect timeline, but I had a home that held me, a voice that had returned, and a name I no longer let anyone reduce. That was enough for now. I placed my hand over the page, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. There was grief, yes, but not regret. I had left. When I needed to, I had remembered who I was beneath their expectations. And I had chosen myself not as a last resort, but as a first act of restoration. That night, I stepped outside alone. The sky was clear, the stars quiet and certain. I stood barefoot in the grass, letting the cool earth steady me. I thought about everything I had carried, all the years I spent trying to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to keep, and how, even then, someone could still look at me and say I was too much, a burden. I let those words float through me, one last time, not to relive the pain, but to honor the truth they revealed. No matter how much you give, some people will only ever see what you cost them, and that has nothing to do with who you are. I closed my eyes and whispered the sentence I had been too afraid to believe. I was never the burden, I was the bridge. The one who held it together, the one who stayed, the one who gave quietly, fully, and now, the one who walked away, not in anger, but in grace. Because some exits aren't escapes, they're returns. And I was finally returning to myself. I looked up at the stars one more time and smiled, not because everything was healed, but because I had chosen to stop waiting for someone else to say I mattered. I had said it. And that was enough. Have you ever been made to feel like a burden after everything you carried in silence?